Thank you for joining us for the Secure Connections podcast, brought to you by IOTSA, the Internet of Things Security Services Association. I'm your host, Brian Sherman, Chief Content Executive for Get Channeled, and joining me for today's episode is Geoff Kreiling, Senior Manager in MSSP and Service Enablement for Fortinet. Geoff has more than 20 years of networking and information security experience and has spent the last 10 years focusing on building managed security services practices. Prior to joining Fortinet, Geoff developed premise and cloud-based managed security offerings at Mastergy Communications and was Director of Product Management at PEG Bandwidth. He has also held a variety of sales engineering, and marketing roles at Verizon and Verizon Business. With his varied background, Geoff can bridge the gap between product development and sales. He uses that unique skill set to help channel professionals develop strategic product offerings that are easy to use and easy to sell. So, Geoff, welcome to the Secure Connections podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Excellent. Looking forward to a great conversation today.
Me too.
So let's start off with a little get-to-know-you question. So how did you get your start in IT? Was it a career goal or a job that turned into one of those lifetime commitments that many of us run into?
That's a great question. As you can see from my varied resume, I kind of fell into telecom many years ago because I was tired of working in retail, to be honest with you. Weekends and inventories were not the most fun things to do. So I got a job at GT, literally slinging what we referred to back then as POTS lines, plain old telephone service, and voicemail, among other things. And I liked it. I was good at it. And I worked my way up from there into the engineering and marketing roles you mentioned. They had a little pit stop at a small PBX operator, and then ended over at Mastergy, where I helped build out their managed services offerings on the Cisco platform. And that led out to, hey, we're an MPLS provider. We need a cloud-based firewall for our cloud-based networking connectivity. That's where I built out our managed firewall practice there, and that's how I got introduced to Fortinet. And so I sit here now, many, many years later, helping our partners build out their managed security practices. And that's really, truly, as you'll see, hopefully in this conversation, I'm very passionate about it. I love it. I can ramble on about the different ways to take that to market. So, it was a long, interesting road, and I'm happy where I am. It's great.
Awesome. And, the one thing I discovered early on, probably 16 years now in the channel is that the telecom space was kind of the birthplace of managed services. Everybody thinks IT and, the VAR community, but some of the earlier level platforms, quite a few of the earlier tools were developed by telecom people, especially out of Canada. So it's an interesting fit. It's always seen as two camps, but quite frankly, it's one camp with just a variety of different tools and experiences.
Right. And the irony there is I literally can remember to this day, and it was 17 years ago when Verizon, after GT and Bell Atlantic merged and we became Verizon, they launched a managed network offering. And I was a sales engineer at the time, and my salespeople's minds were blown. How do you manage stuff? And they didn't know, so I would remember I would sit through these training classes and they talked about how they're going to drop an ADSL connection into a network, and that got them onto the private side, and they could start managing stuff with tools they had in a network operations center. And some people never really quite grasp that concept, but to me, I looked at it, and I'll probably refer to this a lot through our talk, is leveraging other people's expertise to allow you to focus on what you're good at. And once that bell went off in my head, the light went off, if you will. So that makes sense. I'm not the guy that's going to sit there with in the dark room and troubleshoot and get in there, and I'm not that smart. I'm not the guy that can get into the CLI and fix it, but I do understand the basic needs and how to build, the building blocks and the business drivers behind it. And that's really where my skill set has allowed me to take that path, over to Mastergy, over to PEG, and now over to Fortinet, where I'm hopefully using what I've learned in the past 20 years, what works and what doesn't, to help our partners, shape out what they're trying to build.
That's awesome. And based on your experience, you've seen some of the changes over the years, a lot of the changes over the years, obviously. But one of the more current terms everybody uses for, especially in the SMB side, is digital transformation.
Yeah.
So how do you see this affecting SMB customers, and what types of challenges are they facing right now?
Wow, a lot to both, actually. I mean, it really is. It's a paradigm shift, and it reminds me, quite honestly, of another big paradigm shift that you and I probably both remember when the internet was starting to take off. And I used to always joke about, the internet's not going to be anything. And all of a sudden, you have voice over IP. We've got, now it's pivoted into cloud, and the internet really, you can't do anything without being connected to the internet. My 4-year-old daughter knows how to turn on my phone and knows my passcode and can find YouTube Kids. So it's a prevalent part of our technology. And some people, 20 years ago said it was a fad. Digital transformation, I think, is just building upon that. There's so much potential for all businesses, especially SMB, when it comes to digital transformation. Or as we like to call it at Fortinet, DX, but I will not call it that again during this call, but that's how we abbreviate it. Data really is fuel for the digital economy, and that's really, especially in the US, I believe we've really turned into, right? People are moving workloads to the cloud. Even small companies are, tiny companies are. They're leveraging Internet of Things. We're seeing a continued move to leverage digitization of data to drive innovation, right? So that's leading to new business models. We talk a lot now about, cloud native industries that exist solely because they can leverage digitized information sitting in a data center. We're seeing better customer engagements, right? How many times now when you go out and order at a restaurant or go to a movie theater, your wait person comes out with a tablet or some kind of mobile device, and they take your order on that. I've talked to plenty of customers up and down the stack that are talking about how this is driving innovation, it's driving profitability, it's touching on different ways that they can get their information out to their customers. So it's, in their mind, driving engagement, it's driving exposure. Unfortunately, and also on the good side, everything is accelerated. And that's good and bad, because now the threat fabric's accelerated, but the time to market's also accelerated. Some of the drawbacks, though, is business continuity, right? If you're connected via a phone or you're connected via an iPad, you've got to have a wireless connectivity somewhere, right? And then what happens if that goes down? You can't get disrupted. And if you get disrupted, you stop, all of a sudden you're not relevant, because how relevant is that wait person to me if he or she can't get my order into the pad because the system's down, right? You're like, well, this is frustrating. I'm never coming back here again. The flip side, though, is that it does reduce the cost of operations and it increases productivity. They get additional customer insights because they're able to see what they're doing. Because literally, you go in to a building, a restaurant, a shop, movie theater, and if they're using Bluetooth beaconing, or if you're connecting to their Wi-Fi, they're getting all kinds of insights about you. What are you looking at? Where are you going? What else are you interested in while you're on my network? And they're mining that data. So there's new opportunities, there's new revenue streams, there's new markets, there's different ways you can outfox your competition, if you will, by offering new products or services that are insightful, especially to what are we in Gen Z now, or the millennials, I guess, because they look at engagement 180 degrees differently from the way that other people do, right? They want to be driven to Snapchat, and they want to be driven to things delivered on their mobile device. So that's a whole different way to look at things, and I think a great way for them to increase their customer base. Unfortunately, anytime you start doing these things, right, you have a wide open wireless network now. You've got hopefully secured devices. You maybe be running some IoT for cool boards that are running movie promos, and hey, maybe they're doing a Tuesday afternoon promo for popcorn is $2 and you got to download this code. Well, that's all opening up the attack surface too, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you lock that stuff down? Unfortunately, a lot of times we miss the basic security underpinnings due to this increasing complexity of the network. And this cyber complexity is becoming overwhelming. I talk about now that the threat fabric is infinite, because you've got wireless, you've got 3G, 4G coming on the networks, and you don't know if those are infected. So how do you make sure all that stuff's blocked off? Internet of Things devices are what we call headless devices, meaning they're not developed with any inherent security in the device. So if you don't put those things behind a firewall, they're wide open. There are stories and stories and stories of DDoS attacks running through IoT light bulbs and IoT thermostats. I read a great article a couple weeks back about how a very large casino had their entire high roller database stolen because the bad guys hacked a thermometer in a fish tank in the lobby of the casino.
I heard that.
Yes, and that just is like, wow. So that, you don't think about that though, right? So the complexity goes back to, that's how you're missing the basics. Oh, I forgot to lock down the thermometer. Well, who's going to use the thermometer? Well, the bad guys are, right? Because there's more ways for them to get into the network. Determined threat actors can break anything because the perimeters are disappearing and IT teams are overwhelmed by what's going on out there. They can't, if there's not a good plan going in, then they're going to forget to block off those egress and entry points. Right. And, unfortunately, I take a look at it as it's really not a matter of if a company gets breached, it's a matter of when, right? And so they better have a plan. And that plan could be, hey, we segment the network, or we've locked things down, or we have very draconian rules on what you can and can't do inside the network.
I was going to say, Geoff, one thing with the business transformation too, you're talking about all these great things that, companies can do now, the networks, wireless, everything tied in together. The one common thing that I'm seeing is the amount of data being collected is escalating exponentially. Do SMB companies, are you finding that most of them have a grasp of what they have, what to do with it, and most importantly, how to secure it?
Some. I think they realize that data, oftentimes just because they hear people talking about things like big data. I'm not so sure. And again, this is not really a knock on an IT team or an SMB space. It's, it's tough. They probably think it's secure, but they don't really know if it is or not. So that's really where my love and passion comes in, which is helping build out security practices that can help do that, leverage their expertise, leverage economies of scale to go down market or downstream. I don't want to say down market, downstream to these companies to say, hey, I've got a service that can help you, Mr. Customer, Mr. Company, for a fraction of what you can do to do it yourself. And then you can focus on what you need to, because I don't think they're taking as much advantage of it as they can. There's a lot of big data out there that they're probably not correlating and crunching. They just store it going, oh yeah, I've got all this cool stuff and I'll get back to look at it later. But do they ever get back to look at it later? My guess is probably no. And is it secure? Well, if they you think casinos have a lot of money, they can probably, good grief, they build billion-dollar hotels and they take my money every time I go there. You think they would have enough money to lock down everything. But if a casino that has a huge cash flow and huge budgets is missing the thermometer, SMBs that are operating, probably on much thinner budgets might not think that, or might not even know to think about that piece. Cyber's tough to do by yourself, It takes a village, and sometimes the village is leveraging with an MSP and or an MSSP to help lock down those servers and those firewalls and those access points and those switches.
Certainly. Now you mentioned the complexity of it all. Obviously, is a challenge for SMBs. But what obstacles are channel professionals? You mentioned MSPs, MSSPs running into with the digital transformation as well. What are you seeing?
Yeah. So my old SE sales engineer mindset's going to come out here and used to drive my salespeople nuts, because the first question I'd ask whenever they came up to me with anything is I always had to go, what's the application? So to me, the first thing the first obstacle is they really need to define what their customer needs when they talk about digital transformation, right? Because it means different things to different people, right? So when I talk to people about, I just want to take advantage of SD-WAN. Well, what about SD-WAN do you want to take advantage of? Well, I'm not sure, but I read it was cheap. Well, it could be depending on the application you want to do. Well, I want to migrate workloads to the cloud. Which cloud? Why? Public or private? And what workloads do you want to move, and are those secure? Well, I didn't really think about that. I just assumed they would be once they got to point B. Well, sometimes they are and sometimes they aren't. I want to leverage. The sales guy came by and told me about this really cool stuff we can do with our storefront, and all we got to do is connect it to the internet, and we can run ads on it. We can change the graphics and do all these cool things. Is that locked down because that's on your network, right? Yeah. Well, if they can get into that, they can get into the back stuff and start stealing credit card numbers. They don't understand that the attack surface expands every time you add one of these cool new features or widgets. So that once the channel professional really understands the drive behind the need, and then the problem their customer is trying to solve, that will allow them then to come back in with, the network that's going to be needed to handle all this data. Because if you're adding more data, you probably need more network throughput, right? So your costs are going to go up, but how can I manage those? And then how can I wrap the larger, macro view of, I need to protect it, I need to be able to access it, I need to be able to provide people access to it. And that's really where the channel could come in, is to really kind of, herringbone out what their customer really wants to do by digital, what they mean by digital transformation, then provide them the building blocks and the piece parts to actually build that out.
So the consulting part is definitely an advantage today. We've always talked about consulting with MSPs, but I'm seeing the ones that do it well, that can sit down to talk not just about the technical aspects, but as you mentioned, the business aspects. Where do they need to go? What is the purpose of each thing they want to do? And then on the back end is which of their people are going to be more susceptible to breaking the system, especially security.
Exactly.
Those are intricate discussions to have, and I'm seeing a lot more channel professionals being able to do that. And if they can't, they recognize those issues and are building those areas. But
I would agree exactly. My boss, Stephen Talent, who I believe has been on one of these before, is a big fan of find the why. what's driving, why do they want to get from A to B? Start with why. And he always talks about he's the why guy and I'm the how guy. So that you need that 1-2 punch. So you're exactly right. The sales guy can discover the why, and then whether that's your pro service guy or your sales engineer or your network architect, whatever the nomenclatures are at your particular company, they can come in with okay, you've given me the why, now here's the how, and then that's how we wrap it up into an outcome. Because again, you'll hear me say sometimes, I think MSPs and MSSPs at the end of the day are providing outcome as a service, and it's powered by a variety of technology behind that. But the end user customer more often than not just wants to know, hey, Geoff and Brian said that they will do these 15 things every month, and they'll give me a report showing me that, and I trust them, and I believe that's what I'm going to see.
Sure. So, Geoff, you're working with MSSPs on a daily basis, or maybe that you get a day off once in a while. I should just leave you time for vacation. But
right.
What are you seeing, or what are they telling you that are the biggest security threats for the SMB clients that they're supporting?
Yeah, great question, and one I get a lot. And for SMBs, really, it's ransomware by far, but then closely followed by phishing. Those, for some reason, the main reason why, quite frankly, is because the bad guys have literally turned hacking us into a business, and they've got it operationalized. They actually if you look at them, if you look at how a hacker community or hacker organization is built, they will actually sometimes write source code and then sell it out in an agency model, which we're very familiar with in the channel, right? So they'll say, hey, I'll sell you this malware that I wrote and I'll sell it to you for $500, but you give me 10, 20, 30% of everything you get. Or, you buy it in a monthly subscription. That's literally what they do. There's stuff on the dark web out there. They call it, the Google of hacking, where they can go, okay, I go out here and I see this and it's specifically geared towards SMB retail. Okay, I'll buy that. He goes, okay, perfect. It's $100 and you give me 50% of everything you get, right? So with that kind of attack, those kind of barbarians at the gate, if you will, SMBs especially get hammered because there's the perception, I don't know if it's necessarily true, I don't think it is necessarily, that they're not very well protected. So they get hammered with ransomware because also they need to pay it so they can get their network back up and running. And it's also easy. It's super easy to do. You got 15-year-old, 16-year-old kids in Eastern Europe, buying this ransomware and just throwing it against the wall to see what sticks. Right. And if they don't have the controls in there to block it, that's where things really start to fall apart. Now, unfortunately, also phishing attempts are still very lucrative, right? And to me, and again, I'm not a threat research guy. I'm just a guy that helps people solve these problems. But to me, ransomware and phishing attempts are easy to create because they're cheap, but they're also easy to make successful because people love to click on stuff, right? We're curious creatures by nature, and hey, oh my gosh, it's from HR and it says click on this link to look at the pictures of the company picnic. Well, that's got to be legit, right? I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Well, that takes them off to some nefarious website, and if they don't have the basic building blocks on the back end, right? Content filtering, next gen firewall controls, application control to make sure that stuff's going where it's supposed to go, then yeah, it's going to go off and it's going to spin up that malware. It's going to download that ransomware and it's going to install itself, or it's going to take them out to that phishing site, and they're going to get infected. And sometimes SMBs don't have those controls because sometimes they're running on thin margins, or they just don't. The other thing which drives me nuts is I'm too small. It's the herd mentality. And I don't, it's like, no, man, you are the prime example because you think you're not going to get hit, and you are, and you don't know for 6-9 months. And when you do know, it's because you're getting a phone call, or the guys in the dark suits and the sedans drive up and knock on your door and say, hey, we've noticed a preponderance of stolen credit card numbers coming from your business, Mr. Kreiling. You've been hacked for 9 months. And what are you going to do? And more often than not, these guys go out of business because they can't afford the fines or the blowback or the cost to fix everything. So
I find a lot don't use the end user training resources that are available either, as opposed to the enterprise. I mean, I worked for a large Fortune 500 company 15 years ago, and we got security training in those days about what to do, what not to do. But, so that on the enterprise side, they've got that covered. But a lot of SMB companies are just local neighborhood. They don't think, like you said, that they don't think they're the low-hanging fruit. The reality is, especially with like artificial intelligence and the dark web and all of these things being sold, they actually are, because they just keep hammering away.
Absolutely. And it, gone are the days of the script kiddies or the port sniffers who just bounce around and want to create damage. These guys, if they want to get in, they're going to get in, right? The advanced persistent threats. If if that firewall port's blocked, well, I'll find another way to get in, and they just keep trying. And that's why you've got to be able to mitigate that damage if/when something happens, right? Keep that data offsite, locked down with, a 24 character password, dual factor authentication, all that good stuff, which unfortunately starts to get expensive at some point in time.
It tends to do that. So you talk about ransomware and phishing schemes. Are they? We're seeing them and hearing about them every day, especially more on the tech side because we're looking for them. But are they really raising awareness with the SMB customers? And if so, how can channel pros use that to their advantage?
Yeah. Oh man, absolutely. It's to me, it's a double-edged sword. And I'm like you, I watch the tech blogs, but you can see it on the news. And my dad, who's retired and plays a lot of golf, asks me all the time. We're seeing continued media awareness of breaches. I know Experian's a big deal. Office Personnel Management is a big deal. But anytime there's a breach, it's on the news now, right? 5 years ago, only us IT wonks really knew when something was going on because we were reading those, Ars Technicas, or we were following people on RSS feeds, right? Nowadays, you can turn on the news or go to Yahoo or your favorite web portal and see it. It's good because that means more people are talking about it, more people are aware. I've had conversations with my Uber driver about what I do, and which I think is pretty cool. The bad side is it means that more and more breaches are happening, right? And so, so what can our friends in the channel do? We can talk about the managed offerings that they have that can assist. And to me, it's a slippery slope because the last thing you want to do is go to a company that just got breached and go, "Hey, I could have stopped that." Right. So there's got to be, but at the same time, if they're out there talking, I'm assuming they've got an existing customer base they can start having these dialogues with, right? Hey, I realize we're managing your servers and we're doing managed help desk for you. Can we talk about what we can do from managed detection and response play that we've got? Or can we talk about what we're doing with managed endpoint to make sure that those laptops that your people take home every day are locked down and following, your compliance rules you can help you put down there? Can we talk about how maybe giving you secured email can help prevent phishing attacks? Can we talk about what we can do with our managed firewall offering that's got these other controls on it that can, block access to known bad sites, or they can, scan for malware? And then, if you want to get really crazy, start talking about looking at sandboxing to look for 0-day threats. Now, that's not something that I think is going to resonate with a lot of small businesses, but ones that are, but a small business could be a 10-person law firm, and those guys are probably worried about intellectual property theft. So it's going to depend on the vertical as to what you want to talk to them about. But I think, the channel, especially if they've got any kind of managed service practice, can talk about how let them act as an extension of their customer's IT shop and help solve these problems.
Makes perfect sense. I know in our security panel with the IOTA roadshows, that's been a frequent topic is, how it all fits together. And it's one of those, I think, topics that the channel needs to focus on a little more, is how to balance education with, providing them with real life stories. So do you scare them? You have to kind of challenge a little bit with, here's the real life stories. Shouldn't really be scaring them, but it should show them the reality of what can happen. And on the education side is saying, here's proactively how companies prevent this from happening. And that balance is a challenge, especially when you only get so much time to sell your services. Exactly.
Because it is, because breaches have financial impacts now that far outstrip what they did years, 5 or 6 years ago. So you literally are talking about, and especially in the SMB space, about, depending on the study you read, anywhere from 60 to 80% of all attacks are aimed at businesses with less than 250 employees. So, some of that people consider that media business, but so you take that even further down. So there's a lot of SMBs getting hit. And in the SMB space, those are the ones that we see within 18 months of getting breached go out of business, whether they lose business because, the larger companies can take the drop in traffic because that'll come back up, but a smaller company can't, right? If it's a two location flower shop, I'm not shopping at Geoff's Flowers because credit cards got stolen. How long can they survive, right? And if they've got to start paying out fines for violating PCI compliance, can they afford that, right? Cash flow is cash flow, and that takes away from their bottom line. And a lot of times they can't absorb the losses. And that's, and the backbone of our capitalist system is small businesses, right? That's my wife runs a small business, so believe me, I'm on her about that stuff. But, that's what helps keep our economy running. I realize it's larger than that, but to have these dying off really, it bothers me.
Yeah, I can understand. So with that in mind, what kind of tools or best practices do providers need to get their cybersecurity practices off the ground? I know you've worked with a lot of them, Geoff. So
another
that's useful
one that I love. This is great because we get asked this all the time. We've written some guides around it, and there's a couple different ways we look at it. We'll provide some underpinnings, if you will, and then let them take their corporate culture and define what they want to do and what their operations and engineering guys want to do. But I'd say from a best practices perspective, the first thing I would do is standardize on your solution stack, right? So I'm not saying pick Fortinet because I'm not trying to make this into a commercial, but simplify your stack. Standardize on it. It makes it easier for operations to understand how to troubleshoot it, to report on it, to manage it, to configure it. It's easier for your sales teams to sell it because it's a consistent solution every time you sell it, right? So if you simplify and standardize on your solution stack, that allows providers to sell a solution. They're not selling product speeds and feeds, because the minute people start hearing, well, this box does this much and it's got this many ports, people's eyes go roll up at the back of there and they go to sleep. But if you're telling a story, so loop it back to what we just talked about. Hey, Mr. Customer, did you know that if you're hacked, this is probably going to happen, this is going to be the outcome, or scare them a couple times, or think about what 85% of malware attacks cost the average person $500,000. You don't want to scare them, but you want to have them understand the financial implications of that. Sell the solution, sell the outcome. Don't talk about how many Ethernet ports you can put in the back of a box and that can do 10 gig of firewall throughput. Who cares? What can it do to help me? And what it does to help me is you tell the story that your solution solves, right? Mm-hmm. That's how I look at it. And I touched on this earlier, right? MSSPs sell outcome as a service at the end of the day. So they've got to have the tools to provide that to their customers. And that's going to, again, if they standardize the solution stack, that allows them for more rapid and efficient integration and rapid and efficient automation and orchestration as they're making changes on the back end in real time, which makes them more efficient operationally, which means they can get customers turned up faster. They can act on threats more quickly. And if they get that done, then their smart humans on the back end are working on other cool things or helping protect from other threats. It also is going to help their bottom line as they get faster and better at doing these things. And their smart humans know that because it's the same set of devices every time. So they know how it's going to act. They know how to configure it pretty quickly, how to troubleshoot it. The next thing is, and this is a little different, is standardize on a product offering. Try to create an offer that they can sell off the shelf a majority of the time. And when I say off the shelf, make sure it's, they've got a standard document written for it, and a standard service agreement that they can literally go to legal or download off the shared drive and say, hey, Mr. Customer, for our managed security offering, it's here. This is it. Press hard, 5 copies. That I'm a big believer in making it easy on the back end and the front end. So if you have a standard offering that looks like this every time, that's easy to support, it's easy to sell, it's easy to troubleshoot, your sales time should decrease, your provisioning time should decrease, so you're getting that customer to billing faster. And the other reason I say that is because I've seen smaller shops that say, hey, I do everything, as an individual case basis or project based, as I call it. That starts off great as you're growing the business, but you're going to get to some point in time in the growth curve and then that inflection point where doing everything as a one-off does not scale, right? So if you've got 15 customers and each customer does things entirely differently, how do you know which one you're working on? And what happens if the guy that knows how, Kreiling Co.'s, shoe store works gets hit by a bus or quits and everything that he knows is stored in his head? Well, you've lost all that. If you've standardized on a product offering, you can go to your corporate local wikis. You'll know, hey, I know these guys have these 5 things. We do these 10 things for them. Boom, you're done. You're not breaking the back office with complexity. And lastly, and this is another big one for me, and if I'm getting too preachy and soapboxy, please tell me to stop. But
all good.
Sell value. And because I hear all the time, I need to charge what the market's going to bear, or Geoff, we do market-based pricing. Those guys are leaving money on the table, right? Don't commoditize what you do. The services and the smart humans that you guys have behind the services is what's going to differentiate them from their competition. I'm not going to name prices, but I've seen customers selling the exact same device. One customer charges, I'll just say $50. The other customer charges $300. Well, the guy that's charging $50 thinks they're selling market-based pricing. The guy that's selling it for $300 is differentiated in selling value. And guess what? The company on the left is a $50 million company. The company on the right's a $300 million company, because they're selling value. They're selling their culture. They're not getting caught up in a race to zero. They're saying, I do these 10 things or 15 things or 20 things as a service to you. It's hardware inclusive. It's engineering inclusive. It's doing these 5 or 10 or 15 things that you can't do, Mr. Customer. And that's where the value lies. Now, the prices I just made up, but the example
Sure.
is legitimate. And I see it all the time. When I hear people say, what's the market charging? I cringe, because that's the wrong question to ask. The right question to ask is, how can we optimize and maximize what we're selling? What's the value we have? And that's what I ask. And a lot of that's going to come from the corporate culture, right? Are you a high touch company that wants to get in there and solve problems? Well, if you're doing all those things, then there's a fee for that, right? So bake that into the charge. And so you do 20 more things than the competition does, but you're perceived as being more cost effective because you're going higher up the stack or deeper into the network. So look at it that way. Look at what you want to do and how you can do it, and then back into what you need to be profitable and what your cost of labor and whatnot are, and figure out a pricing strategy from there.
Awesome. So Geoff, two other points to that too. Does it help when you're standardizing your stack when it comes to two areas, compliance, and the other would be looking at legal liabilities?
You were paying attention. Absolutely. Yes, sir. I would say 1,000%. Because anytime you've standardized on your solution stack, it's easy, from a compliance perspective, to check those boxes saying, okay, we've got, and maybe it's one vendor, maybe it's two, maybe, I definitely wouldn't want to have more than 2 or 3, but then it's easy to follow the compliance trail, if you will, right? I do these 5 things. It's powered by this technology, and here's the report that shows you that I touch that box every hour or every day. Or if I go in there and make a change, this piece of the solution stack over here records that change and holds it in a database of record and keeps the last 10 of them, and then I can pull that and provide it to an auditing company, and then boom, you're compliant. And from a legal perspective as well, because it's easy to follow the chain of command and the chain of evidence, if you will. Okay, I can see where it starts here, and the ingress is into the network, and I can follow it, through these devices and through this network, and it gets into the endpoint, or gets into the data center. And I can follow that all the way through, so I can see where it might have broken, or where there could have been, it's a nice way to put this, a failure to keep that that information secure or safe, or it wound up where it's supposed to go instead of winding up in an unsecured server. Absolutely.
Makes sense. Now, one of the things I know we've had several of your Fortinet professionals on various podcasts as well as panels talked about the role of threat intelligence and cybersecurity. Mm-hmm. How does that play into the solution stack and the other things that channel professionals should be doing to build their security practice?
Well, I'm a firm believer that cyber threat intelligence is absolutely critical in a cyber offering for a variety of reasons. And if you've got a standardized solution stack, more often than not, you're going to be able to feed that threat intelligence up and down the stack, right? So hopefully it's because it's from similar vendors, or there's API integration between the 2 technologies. But to me, what's even more critical than threat intelligence is what I call actionable threat intelligence. And you need to have that combined with controls to make decisions based on that threat intel, right? It doesn't really do me a whole lot of good, or my smart humans down in the SOC any good, to know, there's been an attempt somewhere, but if I don't know what it is, or if I don't have the tools or the processes to either black hole that IP or quarantine that file or make policy changes to combat the threats, then I'm just kind of standing there wringing my hands going, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? So threat intelligence is critical. Having the ability to see it and act on it and make decisions on it and change policies based on it is even much more critical. And that, again, is driven by having a standardized solution stack that you're operating in, that drives your product and drives your services.
Makes perfect sense. So I could go on for another hour.
So could I.
It's been great, Geoff. But obviously, we're getting a little light on time. But do you have any final thoughts before we wrap for the day?
Absolutely. First off, we talked about digital transformation. It's not coming. It's definitely here. I see it all the time. Literally, I had breakfast with my wife yesterday at a little cafe around the corner from my house. It's family-run business, but they ordered on tablets. We have free Wi-Fi. And I was just, the security wonk in me was screaming, man, I hope this is all locked down. And oftentimes in those smaller businesses, they've got their, second cousin as your IT guy. And that might make, Uncle Jeffy happy because you've hired his son, but they're probably not armed to secure that network properly. And that's where MSSPs and MSPs can come in, right? With their suite of solutions. Hey, let's lock down that Wi-Fi. Let's lock down that switching to make sure that people aren't plugging in and using stuff they're not doing. Let's make sure that those IoT devices are front-ended with a firewall, right? Let's segment the networks. Let's have a response plan. And the thing is, with an MSP, you get an economy of scale that you're not getting from, your second cousin twice removed. We talked about it several times, but it's still, I think, important is look to simplify your security stack. Trust me. I mean, just trust me on this. I've lived it. I've breathed it. I've seen it in action. I've preached about it, and I've seen other people kind of look at me and go, "Oh, you use best of breed point solutions." Well, let's simplify that and see what happens. It makes everyone's life easier, from sales to ops to the customer side of the business. And I guarantee you'll see a profitability increase, a few months after that takes place. And then finally, I would say look to the veteran community for IT and cyber roles. There is a huge lack of talent in the cyberspace, and it's not because there aren't enough smart humans. There's just too many jobs for them to fill, right? There's, hundreds of thousands of jobs and only tens of thousands of people that can fill them. Oftentimes we see that the transitioning servicemen and women have a lot of skills because they're running help desks, right? They're hacking the North Koreans or running red blue teams out there, and they're coming out looking at the civilian world looking for a job. They're more often than not, they're highly polished and skilled operators. They understand how to operate in a command and control environment. So they're really good at giving orders, and they're really good at receiving orders. So not only that, but you'll do good while being good as you help these men and women out.
Well, that's awesome suggestions for our channel audience in particular, Geoff. I agree wholeheartedly, especially on this in the security side of finding new talent. That we could have a whole discussion on that one. Hopefully we will in the future.
Yeah.
But we appreciate you taking your time to share your insight today. It was greatly appreciated. So on behalf of IOTA, I'd like to thank you, the listeners, for tuning in, and I encourage you to check out all the great channel-exclusive cybersecurity content on the association's website. For those of you who haven't visited, it's iotssa.com. With that, I'd like to say thanks again and have a phenomenal day.
Thank you.